Hi, this is Todd Harrison from Venable. I want to thank everyone today who's joining our webinar. I have on the phone or as another presenter my counsel, Kristen Klesch. We are both in the Food and Drug Group at Venable and have a lot of experience in the area of FDA and FTC regulatory law, and have been doing a lot of work over the last few years in the CBD and hemp area. We will be providing CLE credit to everyone who needs it. They just need to contact us. And for our agenda today, before I turn it over to Kristen, we'll give you first an overview of CBD, then marijuana versus hemp versus CBD, who regulates CBD, state-level regulation, the 2018 Farm Bill, CBD takeaways and recent developments, and then we'll get into more specific areas of the animal products and recent enforcement actions, as well as including FDA, FTC, and state-level enforcements. And then hopefully we will have time at the end of the presentation to answer any questions. And with that, I will turn it over to Kristen.
Thanks, Todd. As Todd mentioned, my name is Kristen. I'm a counsel in our FDA group at Venable, and we appreciate everybody being here with us today. And in particular, I know many of you who are joining have participated in an earlier webinar in our CBD series. So some of this, sort of the overview of CBD and where we are, I know will be a little bit of a refresher for you, but we would be remiss not to set the stage and the lay of the land and make sure we're all on the same page. So with that, I'm just going to start by providing a general overview of, what is hemp, marijuana, CBD, of which many of you are probably familiar. So the cannabis sativa plant is a plant species as part of the flowering plant cannabis and includes both marijuana and hemp. I think given all of the press and we'll preview the 2018 Farm Bill, I think many of us are aware, but if you're not, that one of the key distinctions between marijuana, which is still a controlled substance, and hemp is that marijuana contains over 0.3% THC. And by the Drug Enforcement Agency, it's still a Schedule I controlled substance, and that has not changed. Now, as we'll discuss, what has changed is where we are with hemp. And hemp is also part of the cannabis plant, and it's not a Schedule I drug, as we'll see, and it's generally, depending upon the part of the plant that's used, such as hemp seeds, it has been in use in consumer products and food for a while. Obviously, the hot topic or the topic du jour is really where does CBD fall in all of this, and then even as a subcomponent of that, what we'll be focusing on today is where does CBD fall with regard to use in animal products, foods, and drugs. So what is CBD? It's one of the many cannabinoids that's found in the plant. There's actually over 100. And generally, it's positioned as the non-mind-altering compound, right? So THC, sort of probably many of us are familiar with the purported mind-altering effects, relaxation, and so forth. But obviously, even if it's not sort of the same as THC, there's certainly a lot of consumer interest, and there's been a lot of science that it does have some effects on the body. And, we've seen that by the fact that, as we'll discuss, it's been approved as a drug, but also how can this compound play a role potentially in human and animal products. And as we discussed before, CBD, one of the elements is that it's distinct from THC, and it also contains a negligible amount of THC. So there are two THC and CBD, two different cannabinoids of the cannabis plant. And then there are also part of the plant, the cannabis plant has terpenes, and that's really, if you've ever, all of us are actually familiar with these these compounds. If you've ever had a citrus fruit, it's that aroma, that taste. And so the plant involves the cannabinoids and the terpene parts, and that's sort of the gist on if we do sort of a very high level. I don't pretend to be any sort of horticulturalist, but that's sort of where we are with understanding the terminology of the plant itself. So now more into at least my bailiwick is, okay, well, what does this mean from a legal perspective, and in particular CBD? So there's many players involved, and at this point it seems like whether you're a federal regulator or at the state level or even just a trade association, most people have weighed in on their view and position on the use of CBD, whether it's in human products or animal products. But at the moment, we'll just stick with where do federal regulators stand on this. So FDA, with Food and Drug Administration, the area in which Todd and I practice primarily, is in charge of regulating, as we know, drugs, human foods, animal foods and drugs, as well as medical devices, cosmetics. And I think many of us are familiar that they have sort of been the linchpin on how CBD is going to be regulated following USDA's position on the 2018 Farm Bill. So the issues for FDA when it comes to the use of CBD is what is the intended use of the product, whether it's of the ingredient in the product. Is it going to be for a therapeutic purpose? Is it for nutrition as a food? And also concerns regarding the safety and quality of the product, whether it be for humans or animals as well. And FDA has authority to inspect facilities, to issue warning letters, and actually more serious enforcement actions, seizures, and so forth, if they find a significant violation of their rules and regulations, which generally involves the adulteration or misbranding of a product, including an animal, food, or drug, which we'll get to later in the session. And the Federal Trade Commission, I think, originally they had taken a little bit of a back seat with regard to CBD, but that's no longer the case. The Federal Trade Commission is generally charged with regulating advertising. At least that's sort of where, for the purposes of today, the Consumer Protection Bureau regulates how we position largely consumer products. And that can be animal supplements, animal foods, as well as consumer products for humans, including foods and supplements. And they really want to know ultimately, what are you saying, and is it really true? What does the science say? If FDA is an agency that's oftentimes form over substance, say the right words the right way to avoid an unlawful claim and you'll be okay, the Federal Trade Commission peels back the layer a little bit to really dig into the science to pressure test and then pursue enforcement action if they don't believe that your advertising claims are substantiated. So as we'll see, this is the agency that's really going to get into the weeds on the scientific part as well as FDA. And one thing that is important to remember, and why it's critical to sort of keep in mind that FTC is looking at CBD as well, is with FDA, in the normal course, unless you have some major safety concern, if you are found to violate one of their rules or regulations, you will typically, a company will be issued a warning letter, which is a public letter that's a slap on the wrist that says, here, we find you in violation of the law, and you have 15 days to respond with how you will resolve the issues. And you can choose to change your practices or try to fight the warning letter. The Federal Trade Commission is actually a law enforcement body, and so what they will do is issue civil investigative demands, really more akin to subpoena authority, and you can get into long, protracted investigations, document productions. So if the FTC comes knocking, it's typically going to be a painful and expensive process, even if you end up settling without any sort of large monetary fee. But that's important to keep in mind that they are a law enforcement body. Many times you can't get away with a simple slap on the wrist and a promise to be better going forward. You'll see many FTC settlements end with significant sums of monetary payment as part of either settlement or, obviously you could go to court to try and fight the FTC's case. And then we also have DEA, which we talked about originally with marijuana, regulating marijuana as a controlled substance. CBD sort of used to be swept up within that as a controlled substance, and that's not the case anymore. And the final player is USDA, and USDA is charged with issuing the 2018 Farm Bill, which is, as many of you know, caused the resurgence of interest in CBD. Not that it wasn't there before, but I think we had discussed it on the next slide or in a couple. We'll get into the 2018 Farm Bill, which essentially says that CBD can be, or that hemp is defined by 0.3% THC and does not fall within the definition of marijuana, sort of draws that distinction. So that's sort of the federal regulators. And then briefly, but importantly, there's also state-level agencies. And as we walk through this, and many of you who've sort of been tracking this will find that, yes, federal regulators are involved, but the regulatory action and sort of what many of us in the legal industry are equally focused on is state law issues. And that's because states have taken varying positions on their enforcement of CBD. I think many of us know that sort of some states are much more relaxed and permit it possibly even in foods where FDA would say that's not okay. Others are far more conservative and consider even hemp, anything, to be marijuana and a controlled substance in their state, even if that's sort of more conservative than the Farm Bill. And sort of these distinctions in state law are important to keep in mind, particularly if you produce a animal food or drug or human food, and where can you sell it, and are you going to be at risk with state regulators even if you think you're okay from a federal perspective. So we have states' attorney generals, state departments of health. When we talk about animal products, there's obviously boards of veterinary medicine, there's also state boards of pharmacy. And then I think some may be familiar with, particularly if you're focused in the animal food world, with the American Feed Control Officials, AFFCO, which is essentially a voluntary organization that allows regulatory officials to come together to sort of issue their positions on animal feed products. And sort of they'll sort of, even though it's not a law enforcement body in of itself, AFFCO's positions can sort of help provide guidance on where regulators would come down. So that's particularly important when we're talking about animal products. So the Farm Bill, I'll keep this brief because, like I said, I think probably many of us on today's webinar are familiar. But although it seemed in some ways like it was just yesterday, we're now well over, or I guess approaching 2 years. And, when we talk about, okay, we have the cannabis plant and there's different components, essentially the critical piece of the Farm Bill as it applies to hemp products is that it removed removed hemp from the federal definition of marijuana, so it's no longer a controlled substance. And hemp, what does that mean? That's defined with part of the cannabis plant with no more than 0.3% THC. So that THC component is critical in determining whether you're going to be a Schedule I marijuana product or a hemp product. And sort of within hemp, where does CBD fall? Obviously, we talked about that CBD has a negligible amount of THC in it, and so it's sort of generally categorized within that hemp portion. And USDA is the regulator of hemp, at least as an agricultural commodity, although when it comes to sort of what you can say about your products, how you can position them, what regulatory approvals, particularly animal feed and drugs, and the same with on the human side. Obviously, FDA is one of the key players there. So real briefly, under the 2018 Farm Bill, you're required to seek USDA approval for hemp cultivation and research programs. The states can allow cultivation, domestic import and export, and processing, and states have sort of worked to come up with programs in line with the 2018 Farm Bill. Some are further along than others. And then in all cases, hemp cannot exceed sort of that 0.3% THC by weight. So the 2018 Farm Bill, hemp we know is no longer a controlled substance, and it allows a pathway for hemp production. And what importantly it did not do is have any impact on the regulatory status of marijuana or CBD that's derived from marijuana, that portion of the plant with 0.3% THC or more. And it did not change FDA's authority. So I'm sure if anybody's done some Googling, or if you're in the legal industry and have any clients that ask, and I know, we've had people ask, well, I've been on XYZ website and I see the claim that CBD is now lawful in all 50 states. So aren't I okay? And, I think that's where it's important to understand, simply because USDA has sort of allowed hemp to be produced in all 50 states and from an agricultural commodity. That is not to say that when it comes to a product that's ingested and would be treated as a food or a drug, or even a cosmetic or medical device, that where FDA has jurisdiction, that FDA has changed its position on the use of CBD and hemp-containing products. So I think I sort of previewed this, that FDA, sort of in light of the Farm Bill, has been forced to grapple with CBD. I think there's no denying, and the agency has said as much, that ultimately this is happening. CBD is out there. FDA is not going to squash it. And so it's up to the agency to sort of figure out how can it square the development of the CBD industry, whether it be in human foods or animal drugs, with its current regulatory regime, which I'll touch on, that I think many of us know is really just doesn't permit CBD for use in any sort of food product, human or animal. Cosmetics, which, that's sort of outside the scope of today's discussion, but that may be a more of a viable pathway, because FDA doesn't have the sort of statutory restriction on that it does when it comes to the use of CBD in foods. And then obviously we know there's a process, and FDA has made very clear that, of course, CBD can be used as a drug so long as you obtain drug approval. We've seen that on the human side with Epidiolex, and we have not yet seen that on the animal side, but FDA obviously leaves that pathway open. So where does this leave FDA right now? In March of this year, I believe it was right at the beginning of March, FDA issued a congressional report on its position regarding CBD, and this follows its 2019 public hearing, where it invited stakeholders to provide input in response to a variety of questions that FDA has asked about CBD, and primarily focused on the safety and trying to understand where industry wants to go. And one of the issues, at least we'll put human food aside, is that from an animal feed perspective, the ingredients need to be generally recognized as safe, and FDA currently doesn't recognize CBD as generally recognized as safe. From an animal drug perspective, the challenge is that you would need drug approval, and we don't have that yet in the animal food space. So it asks questions about, how can we get there, what are FDA's concerns? In particular, FDA has mentioned that it just has gaps in knowledge, and particularly with respect to safety and purity. It doubled down on its position that, in foods, including animal foods, that the product is not lawful. But it's not all bad news. If you read closely the congressional report, FDA has made clear that it recognizes that this is a burgeoning industry, and that it's still willing to take a risk-based enforcement policy focused on transparency, while it potentially engages in a rulemaking. Obviously, we haven't seen a rulemaking process yet, but FDA is not closing the door on this. And I think that equally applies in the human and animal space, where FDA is inviting industry input, encourages companies to submit data that may possibly be used for animal drugs or foods. I think FDA knows that a pathway has to be carved out as a regulatory agency. It can't just simply say we're either going to look the other way, or that we are just going to consider all of this product unlawful. And so it's just grappling with, how to do that, mindful of issues or its gaps in safety information. And the last thing I'll say, I think, before turning it over to Todd is, to the extent these are used in your animal food products, if you market any sort of CBD product or interested, many of us have seen the use of broad spectrum and full spectrum and isolates, and there's some confusion, I think, in the industry about what these terms mean. I think typically we understand that broad and full spectrum means that there's more cannabinoids than simply CBD, a CBD isolate, but how do we define those terms? And FDA is in particular focused on that relative to the isolate. So a lot of issues, but I think the FDA is hoping to gain more information and carve a pathway forward, although I don't know it's going to be anytime immediate. With that, I will turn it over to Todd, but if you're participating for CLE, we'll give the CLE code right now, which is CBD 2020. Again, the CBD code is CBD 2020. And Todd, feel free to take it from there.
Thank you, Kristen. So everybody is well aware of all the CBD products that are out there. What companies do not recognize is that the way FDA treats animal products, in particular animal dietary supplements, animal food products, is distinctly different than on the human side. But what happens, generally speaking, is that you see this blurring. Well, if it's good for me, it must be good for my dog or cat. And this is where FDA is most concerned with CBD and all the different cannabinoids, as well as THC, because THC can be, at higher levels, can be very dangerous to dogs, for instance. So yet we still see all these products being marketed for the cure and treatment of many diseases. And all these products from FDA's perspective are unlawful. It doesn't matter whether you put it into a pet food, a pet treat, or if you put it into what we call a non-nutritional solid dosage form animal product. And just as full disclosure, I'm the outside general counsel to the National Animal Supplement Council, so a lot of their positions on NASC I have helped shape. And so you don't even just have to worry about FDA. You also have to worry about AFFCO. And AFFCO is an association of the Association of American Feed Control Officials. And it's a membership of all the local, state, and federal agencies who are in charge to regulate animal feeds and animal drugs. And they have their own monograph system for various different feed ingredients, etc. And as of May 20th, 2019, AFFCO's guidelines on hemp and animal food provides that hemp and hemp products may not be used in an animal feed or pet food in the United States, noting the following. materials and products that are CBD infused, sorry, my phone rang. AFFCO, that hemp products may not be CBD infused because if you do, they're drugs. Aside from CBD, there are parts of the plant, such as hemp seed, that have the potential to be approved for animal feed. So even on the human side, hemp seed has been approved for use in human food, and hemp seed oil as well. Understand, neither hemp seed nor hemp seed oil have a significant amount of CBD, if any at all, in it. So when you see somebody marketing their product as hemp seed oil, and they say they have 10 milligrams of CBD, they don't have hemp seed oil, or if they do, they have an oil in which they've infused CBD isolate into it. The impact of AFFCO's position on animal food sales and distribution. AFFCO expects to review hemp seed oil, hemp seed cake meal, and whole hemp seed when industry completes safety reviews. Currently takes the position that cannabinoids will be regulated as a drug, as AFFCO believes no nutritional basis for these compounds to be included in animal feed or pet food. This is very important because CVM and AFFCO generally take the position if an ingredient does not have a nutritional benefit to an animal, it should not be added to the feed. Other than you see fillers and vitamins and minerals, but unless we can show a nutritive reason to add cannabinoids to pet food products, it's going to be probably very difficult to get that through AFFCO or FDA. And people don't understand that and go, well, there's all these products out there. Yes, they're being sold. A lot of them are sold as solid dosage form products, but they're not nutritive. And that gets to what are these solid dosage form products that we like to call animal dietary supplements? Well, in FDA's parlance, they are unapproved new animal drugs of low enforcement priority, i.e., we allow the industry to market this product at our own goodwill. And that's very important. It doesn't matter whether you're a CBD dietary supplement or curcumin dietary supplement for animals. FDA views them the same. They are unapproved new animal drugs of low enforcement priority. FDA all the time takes positions on what they're going to enforce and what they are not. What they are not going to allow companies to do, though, is make drug claims for animal products. They're not going to let you say helps alleviate pain. They're not going to let you say helps alleviate digestive issues. That's just not going to be allowed by FDA or the states. So in that regards, I think that what's important to understand is that but before I turn it back over there, that the states have their own way of regulating these products. The states, as you'll know, it will show in a couple of slides from now, pretty much take the position that I can stop sell your product anytime we want. And if anybody's ever had a stop sell at PetSmart or Petco in a particular state over any particular ingredient, if it's a store in Dallas, for instance, all of a sudden PetSmart pulls them off all their stores in that state. And the main concern of the states and FDA as it regards to animals is safety. And it's not just simply safety in humans. And there's this misconception, well, if it's safe in humans, it must be safe for animals. No, it's not. FDA, you have to show that that CBD is safe in equine separately, cats separately, dogs separately, hamsters separately, because they view those animals as different, and they have different metabolic processes. The metabolic processes between a cat and a dog are significantly different. And so FDA may have less concern on the dog side, but significantly more concern on the cat side, because the cats just don't have the metabolic ability to potentially be able to flush out the CBD. I would also note that we talked earlier about claims. You can't rely on a human clinical study to support a claim in an animal product. Again, the Federal Trade Commission would expect that you would have species-specific studies on it. But yet we see all these CBD products out there. And the problem with it is that nobody can point to a clinical trial in a dog, in a cat, that supports their position of, one, safety, or two, that's actually efficacious at this time. And you see a whole different broad array of how much CBD may or may not be in a product. So I think that it's important that we, as an industry on the animal side, is that we develop that safety data and provide it to FDA. Because again, CBD products are treated like every other non-dosage form product in the United States for animals. And that is, it's by the grace of FDA that they permit you to market the products. So if the industry does not start producing data to FDA to show that CBD is safe for dogs, safe for cats, safe for equines or horses, FDA may at some point pull these products off the market and take it and go after them. And back to a comment that Kristen said earlier, there are states that still consider all hemp to be controlled substances. So they're not legal in all 50 states. And so people who are making these claims need to stop that. If you ask FDA if it was legal under U.S. law, under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, they would say it's not legal at this point. So we need to understand what the Farm Bill did. The Farm Bill essentially decriminalized hemp and CBD, which in reality legalized its industrial use. Basically, it's used for rope, textiles, but it did nothing to impact the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And this is particularly important on the animal side, because the one thing I can tell you with dealing between the human side and the animal side of FDA, CBM takes almost what I would characterize as the precautionary principle: do no harm first. Where on the human side, FDA reviewers tend to take a more risk-benefit analysis to it. So please understand that we're not trying to scare anybody. FDA, nobody's at harm right now to pull the products off the market. But if this safety data is not developed over the next few years, which, by the way, we've wasted a good 5 years. Everything the FDA has asked for could have been done by now if companies would have just done it the right way in the first instance, rather than try to hide behind legal theories of questionable value. And we could be much further along this along this road. With that said, FDA is not about to shut down $1 billion industry either. They understand that they made a mistake back in 2015 when they did not take enforcement action, because they did not foresee that a product would just take off like it did. And it's probably because everybody makes the mistake of believing CBD is legalized marijuana. And with that, I will turn it over to the enforcement side to Kristen.
Great, thank you, Todd. Okay, we've talked about now where does everybody stand. Federal regulators briefly touched on states, AFFCO with respect to CBD and animal products, including pet supplements, animal feed, animal drugs. And so now what does that mean? What really have agencies and various regulators done so far? So I think we're going to find as we walk through this, the FDA side, that we ultimately are in a place that the agency is still, as they are with humans, focused on those companies that are making very aggressive claims. That's sort of consistent with the agency's approach so far with respect to its policy of enforcement discretion, focusing, they can't tackle everybody. The agency wants to find a pathway forward if only it can get sort of some safety data, but it can't completely turn a blind eye. So I think this is a good opportunity to sort of remind companies, where are we and where can you really see some risk? And as we sort of look to try and get that safety data to FDA, in the meantime, where's the FDA focus? So the warning letters, unsurprisingly, they're focusing on the companies so far that are making aggressive claims. And on the animal side, that's typically under two alleged violations. First, an animal food is adulterated because it contains CBD, which is not generally recognized as safe. Similarly, the product is an unapproved animal drug, particularly where it makes reference to therapeutic claims. So, and as Todd mentioned, some of these warning letters touch on issues of safety, particularly the need for additional information about the use of CBD in animals that may also be used to produce eggs, meat, and milk, which will subsequently be ingested by a human population. So, like I said, Todd had mentioned sort of the intricacies of understanding the unique nature of different safety profiles for different types of animals, and then also considering if it's other than sort of a pet food, if it's a livestock animal, what's the downstream effects of CBD? And a couple of examples of warning letters sort of hit this home. So, and if you look at the dates of these are recent. I mean, April 10th, 2020. So even though FDA has sort of issued a congressional report, said in press releases that it's looking for a viable pathway towards CBD, we should not take this as the agency being completely hands-off and turning a blind eye at this time. If you make aggressive claims, FDA is not afraid to go after you. So keep that in mind. So a couple of examples here. Works incredibly well for joint pain in pets, works for anxiety, hyperactivity, PTSD. I mean, similar terms that we would see conjure up a warning letter on the human side. CBD can fight infection and inflammation, which FDA considers to be disease claims, used for anxiety and arthritis. And again, here, CBD hemp oil. As Todd mentioned, you can have hemp seed oil, but if you make reference to CBD or if your product contains CBD, it doesn't really matter what you say about it. If it's got CBD, and FDA will find it to be not appropriate for use in an animal food product or animal drug at this time. CBD may calm my dogs by frantic fireworks, stop my dog's anxiety, ease animals' epilepsy. Again, therapeutic claims that have conjured up warning letters. And on the FTC side, so the FTC joined FDA in issuing warning letters to companies that are marketing CBD animal products. And I should say I focus at the outset on the FTC as the 800-pound gorilla in the room, as sort of this law enforcement body that will issue, come after you with a subpoena authority. FTC will issue warning letters. It's just you can't depend upon it. The FTC could also just go straight to issuing a CID, asking and launching a full investigation. So, I didn't mean to sort of insinuate there could never be an FTC warning letter, but it's not always required. So the FTC has joined in issuing warning letters, again, focused on substantiation. What is the science demonstrating that the CBD in these products has the purported effects that it claims to be? and those generally involved claims that there were therapeutic effects, anxiety, pain, inflammation, many of the same terms that we saw in the FDA warning letters. And one thing I will note too is the FTC is not simply going to just piggyback off FDA. Of course, FDA is grappling with this issue, so how to regulate CBD products in the human and animal side. So FDA will continue to take the lead, but the FTC is also not afraid where it thinks science is lacking to independently issue warning letters or pursue enforcement action. So I don't think we've seen it on the pet food side yet, but at least on the human food side, we've seen that the FTC is at its own accord issued warning letters for unsubstantiated claims for products containing CBD. So I don't think we can rule out the possibility that that could also happen on the animal side. So keeping in mind the FTC as much as FDA. State level enforcement. Todd spoke to this before, and I think we've kind of hit this home that you've got to think about where you want to market your product and really give consideration into specific state laws. You know, whether it's Idaho, which is very restrictive, or Oregon, which is less so. Thinking about that and where you're located and where you want to distribute is very important from a risk perspective, and also distribution. How are you going to get your products across sort of various state lines? So just in this example, on the pet food side, where we don't have quite as much clarity as we may in all state laws, but there are some examples. So Florida will allow CBD in pet foods so long as there's certain requirements that are met, and likewise Oregon, you can manufacture and distribute hemp CBD in pet foods, but they're limited to dog and cat foods, and again, important that the THC content is no more than 3%. Then that's in contrast with it. Just as an example, South Carolina recently came out with a very strong public statement, press release, saying that CBD is not appropriate in animal feed, that it's not going to shy away from issuing enforcement letters to companies that are marketing CBD in animal feed. So we're starting to see, as states come up with laws on the human food and cosmetic and supplement side, they have not forgotten about the enormous pet food industry, and so is also giving consideration to regulations on the pet food side, and we're seeing different outcomes at different states. And then state law enforcement, Todd spoke to this, but that you can get a stop sale. There's also states will issue warning letters, which, not dissimilar to FDA, saying we find you in violation, how are you going to fix it? States go straight to seizure. We've seen some instances of that, at least on the human food side with CBD. And then there can be civil and criminal penalties. In many states, you're required, as a manufacturer of a facility that manufactures human or pet food products, to have certain licensures and registration that can be revoked. So there are many different enforcement actions. So even if you're unlikely, if you're sort of local and think it's unlikely FDA is going to come knocking on your door, it's really the state regulators who can have an equal impact, and so should, we'd be remiss not to sort of focus on where the particular states that you want to market a product, what their position is on CBD in animal products. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Todd to discuss some class action risks and competitor challenges. Do we have Todd? I guess I'll.
Sorry about that. I have to take myself off the mute.
No problem.
Thank you. That's all right. Separate from FDA and FTC, CBD-containing animal products are also at risk of challenges by private plaintiffs. There are two cases: Fawcett versus Coy CBD and De Silva versus Infinite Product Company. Both sought class action certification under consumer protection laws regarding the use of CBD trees, argue that CBD cannot lawfully be sold in pet dietary supplements, The other one had similar type of claims. The Koi CBD case was voluntarily dismissed, which generally tells us that a private settlement occurred between the companies, between the company and the plaintiff in that case. How much they actually paid is who knows. But these type of cases, when they settle privately, can be anywhere from as little as $5,000 to as much as $250,000. So it may not be a significant amount. The Silva versus Infinite Company, that suit alleges the products made by Charlotte's Web and Infinite run afoul of FDA's regulations and consequently violate California's unfair competition law. Something else to be very mindful about the state of California. State of California's position on hemp and hemp-related products, and particularly in CBD, is they're not lawful, period. They have been trying to get a hemp bill through the California legislature now for a year and a half. I have heard the main obstacle is the dispensaries, in fact, that want the law to pass. So it could be it may be because of to keep down competition with the dispensaries and marijuana-based CBD as opposed to hemp-based CBD. So we'll go to the next slide. Let me, if I can go to the next slide. There we go. Other places you can see challenges are the National Advertising Division of the Council of Better Business Bureau regarding CBD-containing animal products. This is a voluntary self-regulatory body that polices claims. They handle about 150 cases a year. They're cheaper than traditional litigation. There has not been any recent challenges by CBD-containing animal products, but there has been challenges on the human side at NAD on label claim of whether the product actually had the level of CBD claimed on the label. So what should the industry takeaways be? The recent agency withdrawal of animal supplement guidance introduces a baseline level of FDA enforcement risk for products marketed as animal supplements or animal dosage form products, in particularly non-nutritional animal dosage form products. If companies follow the NASC guidelines, and I would urge you to contact NASC because they're a great advocacy group for the pet supplement industry generally. FDA generally will leave those companies alone. They generally know that they're following the rules that are in place and have generally significantly less concern. NASC has probably some of the best relationships I've seen at FDA among all the trade associations out there. The CBD industry is growing at a breakneck pace in the U.S., but poses many regulatory issues, and most importantly, being product safety. I will also note that it also presents a lot of competition issues. The fact of the matter is the industry itself can't support all these products. So you're starting to see a die-off of products already in brands. Everybody thinks it's a great thing to get into, but just because you're into it doesn't mean you're going to be able to market your products well. And as more and more bigger companies get into the mix, you're going to probably see at least the market share of all the different companies shrink. FDA has not approved or deemed safe any cannabinoid-containing product marketed for animals. The use of any cannabinoids also present FDA enforcement risk and consumer class action risk. Again, what I really think is very important, FDA is seeking research. They're seeking safety information. CVM in particular is seeking this information. CVM, NASC has had numerous conversations with FDA regarding what they would like to see in the parameters of a safety study and everything. So I really urge companies out there that are in this position that they could actually do studies on their particular hemp extract to do so. If you look at it from start to finish, it would take probably a year for a company to do the appropriate testing, animal testing necessary, that FDA would find sufficient. So I really do encourage, and maybe you should encourage the people who are the manufacturers of the extracts themselves to be, look, this is something we need. And, you're the one, you stand to benefit just as much as I would stand to benefit if FDA decides that safety is okay. Because if FDA decides the other way, the whole industry may come crashing down really quickly. And I think that ends our presentation, and we have some time for some questions. Do we have any Q&As? Okay. It doesn't seem like anybody has any questions. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your time. We hope you find this useful. You can, if you have any questions, you want to just shoot us a question on something, Kristen or I would be happy to answer it for you. Again, thank you for, wait.
Oh, I think we got one.
There is one. Where can CBD products be advertised on social media? Well, CBD products can be advertised anywhere on social media. There might be platforms that restrict the advertising of CBD products. Understand that just because you're advertising it on social media doesn't mean you're exempt from the regular rules. So you can't say something through social media that you could not otherwise say. So that's important, and especially from the FTC standpoint. I know that Kristen talked about this,
yes.
But view the difference between FDA and FTC this way. FDA, in many instances, is form over substance. Is it a permissible structure function claim as opposed, is that claim substantiated? The Federal Trade Commission is just the opposite. They're asking whether the claim is substantiated, and if they're asking if the claim is substantiated, how much evidence they're going to require is going to depend on the type of claim. So a claim that helps with helps prevent cardiovascular disease would require much higher level of science than a claim that it helps support a beautiful, shiny coat.
And I would only add to that, and that's right. We've gotten this question before on, can I do this on XYZ social media platform? And remembering, even though they're so big now, that ultimately these are privately held, or they're private companies, and so they have their own policies on what claims can be made on their platforms for certain types of products, what would be prohibited. I know there's been some questions over, if the Facebooks, the Instagrams of the world, what will they permit about marijuana versus CBD? And I think for that, you have to read their policies, but then also remember, like I said, that these are companies that have the purview to change their positions on sort of the advertising of their products. But I think so far, probably, as Todd said, the risk on social media is largely, are you making a claim that would cause either the platform or regulator itself to sort of find you to be making an unlawful claim for your product.
So we have a question. Has there been any threats or any stop sales issued? I know of one instance where a stop sale has been issued, and that was in the state of South Carolina. I know that Florida has adopted a very draconian rule regarding the use of CBD in animal supplements as opposed to animal food. And we are hoping to have a conversation with Florida in that regards fairly soon. We have the question of what claims can be made for advertising? Well, what substantiation here? The answer is, what substantiation do you have that your product does what it says it does? If you don't have any scientific substantiation, you cannot make any claim, period. So that doesn't stop anybody. And, you know, as I have told clients, you can pay me a little now or a whole lot more later. If you make a claim, it has to be substantiated, period. And it doesn't matter if it comes from a testimonial or if it comes from you. If you say it helps support joint health, you have to have substantiation that supports joint health. Which, Krista, it kind of comes to the next question. You know, we are considering adding CBD animal product with no claims. Yep. That's a good idea, unless it's a pet food, because you have to register it with the state, and you'll be soundly rejected by the state. So if you're looking at a solid dosage form product, you made no claim, probably not going to have an issue.
Right. I mean, right. It's like at this point, being chased by the bear. I mean, nobody gets a completely free pass, but you don't want to be the one that's making the most aggressive claims from at least the FDA perspective. If you are not making any claims and you don't have sort of a state registration issue, if it's a solid dosage form, the likelihood that FDA is coming knocking, or the FTC is probably not, if you're not making any claims, is probably somewhat lower than somebody who's making the arthritis, inflammation, joint pain claims.
Right. I mean, that goes to the question here, Kristen. Improves general well-being. Yes, that's a claim, but the likelihood of anybody giving you an issue about that claim on a scale of 1 to 10 is about a 2. So there are claims that are going to be more risky than others.
And I think that's key. I mean, obviously, we've hammered home that at this point, there's not sort of, this is the compliant pathway that you can sort of have your CBD pet food, pet supplement. So we're in an area of inherent risk. Now, the question is, do you want to be on a 0 to 10 scale, 10 being the highest? How do you avoid being the 9, 10 if you have made the business decision to go ahead and market this type of product and stay sort of in that lower risk territory? And again, we say that form over substance. So this improves general well-being claim. That's sort of phrased in kind of, I don't want the right way, or it's not a really high risk way to phrase it. You don't reference any express disease state. FDA is probably not going to, tomorrow come knocking on your door. Again, the FTC has probably bigger fish to fry. So making sure you're very careful about your wording and trying to take a lower risk approach there will serve you in the long run, again, assuming you have some substantiation.
All right. Well, with that, I think we're right at 3 o'clock, and we appreciate everybody's time. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me or Kristen, and we'd be happy to follow up with you. Thank you again for attending the webinar.
Thank you, everyone.